I slumped back in the worn leather chair, the sterile scent of the clinic filling my nostrils as I waited for Dr. Henshaw. Doyle squeezed my hand reassuringly, his warm smile a stark contrast to the knot tightening in my stomach. We'd been trying for a baby for over a year, and this was supposed to be a routine checkup. The door swung open, and a flustered nurse bustled in, her arms laden with files. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter," she nodded, rifling through the papers. "Ah, congratulations are in order, it seems," she beamed at Doyle. "The little one is due in 7 months. Alara must be over the moon." The room tilted as the words hit me like a sledgehammer. Alara? A baby? My heart pounded in my ears as I shot Doyle an accusatory glare, but his brow was furrowed in confusion. I think you have the wrong file," he stammered, his face paling. The nurse's eyes widened, and she hastily checked the paperwork. "Oh, goodness, you're right. My apologies." She scurried out, leaving a suffocating silence in her wake. Doyle cleared his throat. "Marion, honey, it was just a mix-up. You know how scatterbrained some of these nurses can be." His words should have reassured me, but something nagged at the back of my mind. A tiny splinter of doubt that would soon fester into a gaping wound of betrayal. The drive home was a blur, the city lights melting into streaks of color as my mind raced. Doyle's reassurances rang hollow, drowned out by the nurse's words echoing in my head. Alara, a baby due in 7 months. As soon as we stepped through the front door, I rounded on him. "Who is Alara?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and dread. Doyle sighed, rubbing his temples. "Babe, it was an honest mistake, nothing more." "Don't babe me," I snapped. "I'm not an idiot, Doyle. That nurse clearly knew something I don't." His eyes narrowed. "You're overreacting, Marion. It was a simple mix-up of files, that's all." I opened my mouth to protest, but something in his coat pocket caught my eye, the corner of a crumpled receipt. Without thinking, I snatched it out. "Hey!" Doyle lunged for me, but I danced out of his reach, my heart pounding as I smoothed out the paper. Prenatal vitamins. The receipt was for a bottle of prenatal vitamins from a pharmacy downtown. I looked up at him, my vision blurring with tears. "Tell me the truth, Doyle, right now." His shoulders slumped in defeat. I don't know how to say this." "Try me," I growled through gritted teeth. He took a deep breath. "There's someone else. Alara. She's pregnant with my child." The words landed like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I stumbled back, clutching the receipt like a lifeline. Doyle reached out to me, his eyes pleading. "Marion, I'm so sorry. It just happened. But I still love you, I swear." I recoiled from his touch, bile rising in my throat. "How could you?" I choked out. "After everything we've been through, trying for a baby of our own?" He flinched, shame flickering across his face. I know, and I hate myself for it, but we can work through this, I promise." Rage bubbled up inside me, scalding and all-consuming. I grabbed the nearest object, a ceramic vase, and hurled it at him with all my strength. He ducked just in time, the vase shattering against the wall behind him. "Get out," I seethed, my body shaking with fury. "Get out of my house, you lying, cheating bastard." For once, Doyle didn't argue. He hung his head and trudged out the door, leaving me alone with the shards of my broken heart scattered at my feet. The next few weeks were a waking nightmare. I functioned on autopilot, going through the motions at work while my personal life crumbled around me. Doyle had moved out, taking his things while I was at the office. A small mercy, I supposed. I didn't think I could bear to see his face again so soon. Still, the questions swirled endlessly in my mind. How long had this been going on? Who was this Alara woman? And why, after all our struggles to conceive, would he throw it all away like this? I knew I needed answers, if only to find some shred of closure. So I started digging. It didn't take long to uncover the truth about Alara Benson, a 29-year-old graphic designer at a trendy marketing firm downtown. Social media painted the picture of a vivacious, free-spirited woman with a zest for life, the perfect counterpoint to my own sensible, by-the-book existence with Doyle. A few carefully worded inquiries revealed that she was indeed pregnant, just over 4 months along. The timeline matched the nurse's words at the clinic, confirming my worst fears. Doyle had been lying to me for months, maybe longer. But the deepest cut came from an unexpected source, my own fertility doctor, Dr. Henshaw. During a follow-up appointment, he made an offhand comment about Doyle's other obligations causing delays in our treatment plan. What other obligations? I demanded, my heart racing. Are you talking about his affair? Dr. Henshaw's eyes widened, and he immediately backpedaled. Mrs. Carter, I assure you, doctor-patient confidentiality prevents me from discussing Mr. Carter's private matters. But the damage was done. I felt a sickening pit open up in my stomach as the pieces fell into place. Dr. Henshaw had known about Doyle's infidelity all along and said nothing, allowing me to pour my heart and soul into a hopeless dream of starting a family with a man who had already moved on. I stormed out of his office, tears of rage and humiliation stinging my eyes. How could they have betrayed me like this? Doyle was one thing, but Dr. Henshaw was supposed to be on my side, guiding me through this arduous journey. As I sat in my car, the hurt and anger swirled together, hardening into a resolve as cold and unyielding as steel. They would pay for this, both of them. I would make sure of it, no matter what it took. Armed with Alara's address and a burning determination for vengeance, I showed up at her sleek downtown apartment building one evening after work. My heart was pounding as I buzzed her unit, half expecting her not to answer when a stranger's voice crackled through the intercom. Hello? I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. Alara Benson? My name is Marion Carter. I think we need to talk. There was a pause, then a resigned sigh. Come on up. The ride up in the elevator was agonizing, my palms slick with nervous sweat. What was I going to say? How would she react? The door swung open before I could think too hard, revealing a petite woman with tousled dark hair and a slightly rounded belly, the unmistakable curve of early pregnancy. You must be Marion, she said, her voice carefully neutral as she stepped aside to let me enter. I'm guessing this is about Doyle? I nodded mutely, unable to find the words as a fresh wave of hurt swept over me at the sight of her pregnant form. Alara sank onto the plush sofa, absently rubbing her stomach as she studied me with those soulful eyes. How much do you know? The question snapped me out of my stupor, anger flaring hot in my chest. Enough, I bit out. Enough to know that my husband knocked you up behind my back. She flinched at my harsh tone but held my gaze steadily. I had no idea he was married, Marion. Not at first. Of course he'd lied to her, too. Typical Doyle. I opened my mouth, ready to unleash the full force of my fury, but Alara held up a hand, cutting me off. Please let me explain. She took a deep, shuddering breath. We met at a work party back in August and just hit it off. Things moved quickly after that, but he assured me he was single, separated from his wife. I didn't find out the truth until a few weeks ago, when I happened to see a family photo of you two on his desk at home. My stomach churned at her words, the gravity of Doyle's betrayal hitting me all over again. Alara looked at me imploringly, tears shimmering in her eyes. I swear, Marion, if I'd known, I never would have gotten involved with him. You have to believe me. In that moment, as I stared at this woman carrying my husband's child, I saw the same hurt, the same anguish reflected in her expression that I felt clawing at my insides. We were both victims of Doyle's selfish lies. A twisted sense of kinship washed over me then, bonding us in our shared pain. This poor woman had been just as deceived as I was, maybe even more so. Slowly, I crossed the space between us and sank onto the couch beside her. I believe you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And Doyle is going to pay for what he did to both of us. Alara's eyes widened, then hardened with resolve. She gave a brisk nod. Tell me what you need me to do. The weeks leading up to Doyle's birthday party were a flurry of covert planning and deception. Alara and I worked tirelessly, coordinating every detail under the guise of throwing him a surprise celebration. Little did he know, we had something much more explosive in store. You're sure about this? Alara asked one evening as we pored over the guest list. There's no going back after tonight. I glanced around my living room at the cheerful decorations and gift-wrapped boxes stacked in the corner, all a carefully constructed ruse. Absolutely, he needs to be exposed in front of everyone who thinks he's this upstanding, trustworthy guy. Her jaw tightened and she gave a resolute nod. Then let's do it. The big day arrived and our plan unfolded perfectly. One by one, Doyle's colleagues, friends, even his own mother filed into my house, all eager to surprise the guest of honor. Finally, the man himself arrived, striding through the door with a bemused grin. What's all this? Surprise! We cried in unison, feigning delight as cameras flashed and people swarmed around to greet him. For a moment, Doyle just blinked at the crowd, utterly blindsided. Then his gaze found mine, and his expression shifted to one of wariness. "Marion?" "Happy birthday, darling," I said, layering on sugary sweetness as I crossed the room to give him a lingering kiss on the cheek. "We've got one more surprise for you." Alara stepped forward then, her blossoming baby bump impossible to miss. A hush fell over the room as realization dawned on Doyle's face. "You," he choked out, paling rapidly. "What are you doing here?" "Congratulations, babe," I said with saccharine venom. "You're going to be a father." Stunned silence hung in the air, punctuated only by a few shocked gasps from the crowd. Doyle's eyes darted around wildly, like a cornered animal. "Marion, Alara, please," he began desperately. "This wasn't how I wanted you to find out." A derisive snort came from the back of the room. "Find out you've been lying and cheating, you mean?" I turned to see Doyle's mother pushing through the throng, fury etched into every line of her face as she regarded her son with disgust. "How could you, Doyle? How could you do this to these poor women?" It was like a dam bursting. Furious whispers and accusations rippled through the guests as the truth sank in. Colleagues, friends, people who had trusted and respected Doyle now looked at him with contempt. I drank in every agonizing second, watching his world crumble before my eyes just as mine had weeks ago. This was karma, plain and simple. Doyle whirled on me, anguish and anger warring on his features. "Is this what you wanted, Marion? To humiliate me in front of everyone I know?" Meeting his gaze, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "It's what you deserve." The fallout from Doyle's birthday party was swift and brutal. Within days, news of his sordid affair had spread like wildfire, destroying his once sterling reputation in our small community. But that was just the start of his reckoning. I'll never forget the morning his boss, Richard Henderson, showed up at my door. The grim-faced CEO had clearly heard the rumors and demanded to know the truth. "Is it true, Marion?" he asked, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Has Doyle been unfaithful?" I met his gaze steadily, no trace of pity for the man who had so callously betrayed my trust. "It's true, Richard. He got another woman pregnant while we were trying to have a baby of our own." Richard's shoulders slumped, and he removed his glasses to pinch the bridge of his nose. "You have to understand, this is a family company with strong moral values." He trailed off, but I knew exactly what he meant. Marketing Millennial Solutions had built its brand on the persona of happy, wholesome influencers, the last people you'd expect to be embroiled in a salacious cheating scandal. "I see," I said, folding my arms across my chest. "So what happens now?" Richard let out a weary sigh. "I'm afraid his position is untenable. There's a strict morality clause in all our employee contracts. Infidelity." He shook his head. "I have no choice but to terminate Doyle's employment, effective immediately." Just like that, Doyle's high-powered marketing career, the culmination of years of hard work and ruthless ambition, went up in flames, all because he couldn't keep it in his pants. I should have felt vindicated, or at least satisfied that he was finally facing real consequences for his actions. But as I watched Richard's car pull away, I realized this was only the beginning. The lawyers came next, first mine, then Alara's. Turns out my dear husband's indiscretions had opened him up to a tidal wave of legal troubles on top of his professional disgrace. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraud, breach of contract, the charges piled up, each one another nail in the coffin of the life Doyle had so meticulously constructed. He tried to fight it at first, pleading with me to show mercy, to think of all our years together. But I was unswayed. His pleas fell on deaf ears. Alara, too, was unrelenting in her demands for restitution, adamant that he take responsibility for the harm he'd caused us both. In the end, the courts sided with the wronged women, awarding us both substantial settlements directly from Doyle's assets and future earnings. The financial blow was as devastating as the public humiliation, stripping him of the wealth and status he'd so coveted. As I watched the once confident, successful man slink away in disgrace, I felt an odd sense of hollowness. This was the vengeance I'd sought, the karma I'd craved, and yet it didn't bring the closure or relief I'd expected. Doyle was ruined, his world in ashes around him. But the anguish of his betrayal still lingered deep within me, an open wound that may never fully heal. In the weeks following the legal fallout, Doyle became a shadow of his former self. Gone was the cocky swagger, the easy confidence that had once drawn me to him. Now he just seemed broken. Not that I had any sympathy left for the man who had so thoroughly shattered my trust and our vows. If anything, seeing him reduced to a hollow husk only reinforced my resolve. He tried, in his own pathetic way, to make amends. Endless apologies and promises to change his ways, to be the man I deserved. But his words rang hollow, meaningless platitudes from someone desperate to cling to the lie of the life we'd once shared. Alara, at least, wanted nothing to do with his groveling. She'd made it clear from the start that she planned to cut Doyle out of her life completely once the baby was born, raising the child free from his toxic influence. I almost envied her certainty, her ability to simply walk away and start fresh. For me, the wounds went deeper, the scars of his betrayal an ever-present ache in my heart. Then one rainy evening, there was a heavy knock at my door. I opened it to find Doyle on my doorstep. Shoulders hunched against the downpour, a familiar hangdog expression etched into his features. "Marion," he said hoarsely, water dripping from his soaked hair. "We need to talk." Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, to shut him out, as he had shut me out of his life for all those months with Alara. But something in his haunted eyes gave me pause. With a resigned sigh, I stepped back to let him in from the rain. "Make it quick, Doyle. I'm done playing games." He flinched at my blunt words, then nodded solemnly as he followed me into the living room. "I know, and you're right. You deserve better than any more of my lies and deception." For a moment he seemed to struggle, Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "I came to say goodbye, Marion, and to beg for your forgiveness one last time." I opened my mouth, a biting retort on my lips, but he pressed on, his voice thick with emotion. "What I did, there are no excuses, no justifications for the pain I caused you and Alara. I was selfish and arrogant, taking both of you for granted in my pursuit of... I don't even know what, honestly." His gaze, those warm brown eyes that had once made my heart skip a beat, bored into me with raw sincerity. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Marion, and I threw it all away like a damn fool." I swallowed hard past the lump forming in my throat, my anger slowly ebbing in the wake of his chillingly honest confession. A part of me, the part that still stubbornly clung to the memories of the man I'd fallen in love with, wanted so badly to offer him absolution. But I knew that was impossible now. Too much had happened, too much trust betrayed. The old Doyle, the man I thought I knew, was gone, and no amount of pleading would undo the rift he himself had created. So instead, I simply said, "Goodbye, Doyle. I hope you can find some measure of peace, for your sake, but we're through." His face crumpled for the briefest moment before the mask slipped back into place, leaving only a haunted sort of resignation behind. With a somber nod, he turned and let himself out, the door clicking shut behind him with a sobering finality. I stood there alone in the silence, raindrops pattering against the windows, wondering if that gaping void in my heart would ever heal. The months that followed were a slow, painful process of picking up the shattered pieces of my life and trying to rebuild. Doyle's betrayal had left me adrift, questioning everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the dreams we'd once shared. But I was determined not to let his selfish actions define me. I was more than just a scorned wife. I was a strong, capable woman who deserved a fresh start. The settlement from the legal battles had left me with a sizable nest egg, enough to finally pursue that long-deferred dream of opening my own cozy little bookshop. It seemed fitting, in a way, surrounding myself with stories altri, finding solace between the pages when my own narrative had taken such a dark turn. I spent weeks scouring property listings until the perfect spot opened up, a quaint corner storefront in a charming downtown district. From the moment I stepped inside the aging but sturdy brick building, I could envision it all. Overstuffed armchairs flanking a fireplace, shelves brimming with well-loved tomes, and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. Transforming that empty shell into my literary haven was grueling work, between renovations, sourcing inventory, and handling all the logistical minutiae of opening a small business. But I poured myself into the project, finding refuge in the simple, methodical tasks that allowed me to push Doyle and all the pain of his deception to the back of my mind, if only for a little while. The day we opened our doors, I could scarcely believe how far I'd come. As I watched the first customers trickle in, marveling at the cozy book-lined interior with its plush seating and the inviting espresso bar, a sense of pride swelled in my chest. This was my life, my passion, profoundly my own, in a way nothing with Doyle ever could be. In the months that followed, the shop became my sanctuary, a cherished space where I could connect with others over the shared love of a good story. I savored the daily interactions with my patrons, swapping recommendations and bonding over the ability of the written word to transport, console, and inspire us. It was during one such chat with a regular customer that I heard the news. Alara had given birth to a healthy baby girl and left town shortly after, determined to start over somewhere far from the lingering shadows of Doyle's deceit. I couldn't begrudge her that. We had both been through the emotional ringer, and she deserved the chance to raise her daughter in peace, unburdened by the past. In a way, we were kindred spirits, joined by our shared trauma yet emerging from the ashes like twin phoenixes, reborn and resolute in our fresh beginnings. Though our paths had diverged, I knew a part of me would always be bound to Alara through the crucible of Doyle's betrayal that had ultimately brought us together. We exchanged numbers through the customer who had relayed the news, and a few days later, my phone pinged with an image, Alara cradling her newborn daughter, both of them bathed in golden sunlight. A simple caption accompanied the picture. "Here's to new chapters." As I traced the curve of the tiny infant's face, I felt a profound sense of release wash over me. Like Alara, I too was turning the page and allowing the hurt to finally begin fading. Our story may have started in darkness and deception, but we had both found the courage to rewrite our own endings, this time on our own terms. I, Evelyn Turner, at 45, found myself standing at the edge of a precipice I never imagined. Richard, my husband of 15 years, stood before me, his eyes a mirror of disdain and frustration that had been brewing over the years. "You're nothing but a leech, Evelyn. If you're so unhappy, why don't you just leave?" His words, laced with venom, cut through the tense silence of our living room. I looked at him. This man I had shared over a decade of my life with, and felt a strange sense of detachment. The beer can he flung at me, still dripping down my face, was a cold testament to how far we had fallen. The sticky liquid on my skin was nothing compared to the sting of his words. "Fine, I will," I retorted, the weight of my decision settling in my heart. I wasn't going to be a punching bag for his frustrations any longer. I thought back to the early days, the love that had once seemed unbreakable. We were both career-driven when we first met. I was a promising marketing professional, and he worked at the local government office. Marriage came with dreams of a happy family, a dream that slowly turned into a haunting mirage. The pressure to have a child became a silent wedge between us. I still remember the day I decided to leave my job 5 years into our marriage. The unspoken expectations from Richard's family, the pitying looks, the whispered questions. They were all too much. I thought stepping back from my career to focus on fertility treatments would ease the tension. How wrong I was. As years rolled by without the pitter-patter of little feet we so desperately longed for, Richard's patience wore thin. His once supportive demeanor turned to bitterness, each failed attempt a blow to his ego, his manhood. "Your body's just not up to it, huh?" His words from a particularly harsh argument echoed in my mind. I had borne them all, the treatments, the side effects, the crushing disappointments, and yet here I was being called a parasite. With a deep breath, I stepped over the threshold of our home, the door closing with a finality that echoed my resolve. The night air felt different now, almost liberating. The suburban street, usually quiet and unassuming, felt like the runway of a new beginning. I didn't know where this path would lead me, but one thing was clear. I was no longer the woman who would shrink under the weight of Richard's disdain. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it was mine to make. The train to my parents' house offered a fleeting escape, each passing landscape blurring into a montage of my thoughts. My parents, Robert and Diane, were a beacon of comfort in the tempest of my life. As I stepped into the familiar warmth of my childhood home, their concerned expressions were a silent testament to my unannounced arrival. "Mom, Dad, My voice faltered. the weight of my confession anchoring me to the spot. "What happened, Evelyn? You look like you've been through a storm." My mother's voice was laced with worry as she reached out, her touch a reminder of simpler times. I let out a deep sigh, the dam of my emotions breaking. "Richard and we had a fight. I couldn't stay there anymore," I confessed, the words tasting bitter. The look of shock on my parents' faces quickly turned to anger. "That man has always been a thorn," my father muttered, his disappointment in Richard never a secret. I recounted the events of the night, the years of accumulated pain spilling over. My parents listened, their expressions a mix of anger and heartbreak. They had never truly approved of Richard, but their love for me had silenced their objections. "He called me a parasite, Mom." I choked on the words, the hurt resurfacing. "A parasite? After everything you've sacrificed?" My mother's voice rose in disbelief. "You gave up your career, endured those treatments?" Her words were a painful reminder of the life I had left behind. I had been a rising star in the marketing world, full of ambition and ideas, but the desire to start a family, fueled by societal expectations and familial pressures, had led me down a different path. Richard's support had been my solace during those trying times. But as each treatment failed, his patience waned, replaced by a bitterness that poisoned our marriage. The man who once held my hand through every doctor's visit had transformed into a stranger, his frustrations often unloaded onto me. My father's voice pulled me back from my reverie. "You don't deserve this, Evelyn. You've been more than patient with that man." Their words, though comforting, were a stark reminder of the reality I now faced. I was no longer part of a we. It was just me, standing at the crossroads of my life. As I lay in my old bedroom that night, the moonlight streaming through the window, I made a silent vow. Richard would see the woman he had underestimated. This was not just about leaving a failed marriage. It was about reclaiming the parts of me that I had lost along the way. The dawn of the next day was more than just a new morning. It marked the beginning of my journey towards self-reclamation and retribution. The days following my return to my parents' home were a blend of healing and introspection. Amidst the nurturing care of my family, I found myself reflecting on the years lost to a marriage that had become a shadow of its promise. It was time to step out of that shadow. I set up a small workspace in the corner of my old room, my laptop, an old friend welcoming me back. The world of marketing, once my arena of triumph, beckoned me again. I started reaching out to contacts, piecing together a freelance consulting business. It felt like awakening from a long slumber. "Remember, Evelyn, you were always meant for more than what that man allowed you to be," my father said one morning, his words a bolstering force. I found solace in the rhythm of work, the challenges a welcome distraction. My expertise, once set aside to fulfill the role of a hopeful mother and neglected wife, now became my weapon of independence. Then, one evening, as I sat immersed in a project, my phone buzzed. It was Richard. My heart skipped a beat, a mix of apprehension and anger bubbling within. "Evelyn, we need to talk. You can't just leave things like this." His voice was a mix of frustration and feigned concern. "Talk? Now you want to talk, Richard?" I countered, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "You're overreacting. Come back and we'll sort this out. You belong here with me," he said, a tinge of command in his tone. I scoffed, the audacity of his words igniting a fire within me. "Belong with you? As what, Richard? Your punching bag, your scapegoat for everything that's gone wrong?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear the cogs turning in his mind, searching for a retort. "Evelyn, you're being unreasonable. This is your home," he finally said, his voice laced with a false calm. "Unreasonable? No, Richard. For years, I've been the reasonable one, accommodating your moods, your failures, your bitterness. I've lost myself in the process, and I'm not willing to lose any more." The conversation ended with a deafening silence on his end. I hung up, a sense of liberation coursing through me. It was the first time I had spoken back, the first time I had refused to be overshadowed by his ego. As days turned into weeks, my consulting business began to flourish. The satisfaction of rebuilding my career was accompanied by a newfound confidence. I was no longer the woman Richard thought he could control. I was Evelyn Turner, a professional, a survivor, and now a fighter. This new path was not just about financial independence. It was about reclaiming my identity, my dignity. Richard's attempts to belittle my efforts only fueled my determination. The stage was set for a confrontation, and this time I was ready. The newfound strength I had discovered in myself was put to the test sooner than I expected. Richard, ever the manipulator, had grown increasingly desperate in his attempts to regain control. But I was no longer the woman who cowered under his shadow. One fateful evening, as I was finalizing a project, a knock at the door shattered the tranquility of my parents' home. There stood Richard, his face a mask of false contrition. "Evelyn, we need to talk. I've made some mistakes, but we can work through this," he pleaded, stepping into the house uninvited. My father, standing behind me, bristled with anger. "You have some nerve showing up here after what you've done," he growled. Ignoring my father, Richard's gaze fixed on me. "Evelyn, don't let your family cloud your judgment. We're married. That means something." I felt a surge of defiance. "Married? That bond shattered the moment you threw that beer can at me, Richard. What do you want?" He hesitated, and then, as if throwing caution to the wind, revealed the true reason for his visit. "I'm in trouble, Evelyn. The gambling, it's gotten out of hand. I owe a lot of money." The revelation hit me like a wave. His gambling was not just a vice. It was an addiction that had now spiraled into a crisis. "And you think I should bail you out?" I asked, incredulity lacing my words. Richard's face contorted into a sneer. "Who else do I have, Evelyn? You owe me. I supported you through all those treatments, remember?" The audacity of his words was like a slap in the face. "You think I owe you? For what? For years of neglect? For emotional abuse? For calling me a parasite?" The room was thick with tension, my parents standing in silent support behind me. Richard, realizing his usual tactics were failing, shifted his approach. "Evelyn, think about it. If I go down, you go down with me. Your precious new life will be ruined," he threatened, a desperate edge to his voice. But I was done being intimidated. "No, Richard, you made your bed and now you have to lie in it. I am not responsible for your debts, your failures, or your life." Defeated and enraged, Richard stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The finality of that moment was not lost on me. I had stood up to him, unyielding and resolute. The next morning, I met with a lawyer to discuss the divorce proceedings. Richard's gambling debts were his alone, and I was determined to ensure they stayed that way. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, a sense of empowerment enveloped me. I had faced my fears, confronted my tormentor, and emerged stronger. The path ahead was not going to be easy, but I was ready for whatever challenges it brought. The days following my encounter with Richard were a whirlwind of legal meetings and emotional preparation. My lawyer, a competent and empathetic woman, guided me through the divorce proceedings with a reassuring professionalism. Yet, amidst the legalities, there was a storm of emotions brewing within me, a mix of liberation and lingering hurt. Meanwhile, Richard's situation worsened. His gambling debts had caught up with him, and his desperate attempts to find financial relief only plunged him deeper into the mire. I heard through the grapevine that his job was on the line and his reputation was in tatters. This was the karma he had earned, yet I found no joy in his downfall. "Mom, do you think I'm doing the right thing?" I asked one evening, seeking validation amidst the chaos. My mother, ever the pillar of strength, took my hand. "Evelyn, you're reclaiming your life. That's the bravest thing you can do." Her words were a balm to my troubled soul. I had spent years under Richard's shadow, and now I was stepping into the light, albeit a tumultuous one. The day I signed the divorce papers was bittersweet. On one hand, I was freeing myself from a toxic marriage. On the other, it was the end of a chapter I had once hoped would be my forever. As the reality of my new life settled in, I found solace in my work. My consulting business was not just a means of livelihood. It was a testament to my resilience and capability. Clients appreciated my expertise, and the satisfaction of successful projects was a reminder of what I had lost and found again, my professional identity. Richard, however, seemed to spiral further out of control. He tried to reach out several times, sometimes pleading, other times accusing, but I stood firm, supported by the unwavering love of my family and the newfound strength within me. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a project proposal, a call from an unknown number caught me off guard. Hesitantly, I answered, "Evelyn, you need to help me. They're going to take everything." Richard's voice, panicked and broken, echoed through the phone. Richard, I can't help you. You've made your choices, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil his words stirred. You don't understand, Evelyn. I'm ruined. I've lost my job, my reputation. You can't just abandon me like this, he pleaded. Abandon you? Richard, you abandoned me long ago, in every way that mattered. I'm sorry, but you have to face the consequences of your actions. Hanging up the phone, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. Richard's fate was no longer my burden to bear. My journey ahead was mine alone, paved with the lessons of the past and the promise of a future I would shape on my own terms. The final chapter of my marriage to Richard closed with a mix of relief and introspection. My newfound independence was both exhilarating and daunting. I had weathered the storm of a crumbling marriage, and now, standing amidst the ruins, I was ready to rebuild. My consulting business was thriving, a symbol of my resilience and capability. The freedom to make my own decisions, to steer my life on my own terms, was a heady feeling. Yet, amid this newfound success, Richard's shadow occasionally loomed. News of his complete downfall trickled down to me through mutual acquaintances. He had lost his job due to his gambling scandal, his reputation irreparably tarnished. The once respected public servant was now a pariah, shunned by those he had once considered allies. One evening, as I was preparing for a client meeting, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Richard. With a deep breath, I answered, ready for whatever accusations or pleas he had this time. Evelyn, please, I'm begging you. I have nothing left. Can't you see it in your heart to help me? Richard's voice was a mix of desperation and self-pity. Richard, I helped you for years. I supported you, even when you gave me nothing but pain in return. I can't be your savior anymore, I replied, my voice firm. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Seeing me suffer. You've always been so cold, so heartless, he accused, his words laced with bitterness. I felt a twinge of anger at his accusation. Heartless? After everything I endured with you? No, Richard, I'm not heartless. I'm just no longer willing to be a victim to your choices. There was silence on the other end, and then a soft, defeated sigh. I never thought it would come to this, he murmured, more to himself than to me. The call ended, leaving me with a mix of emotions. Pity, relief, and a sense of finality. Richard's downfall was of his own making, his karma for the years of neglect and emotional abuse. As I moved forward with my life, I focused on my work and my family, the pillars of my strength. I even began planning a community project, a way to give back and connect with others. My past with Richard was a chapter closed, a lesson learned. The journey was not without its scars, but it was also filled with growth and self-discovery. I had emerged from the shadows of betrayal, stronger and more determined. My story was one of empowerment, of a woman who reclaimed her life from the clutches of a toxic marriage, and in doing so, found her true self. And so, as I sat at my desk looking out at the world that was once a daunting expanse, I realized it was now a canvas of possibilities. I had survived the storm, and now it was my time to thrive,